Part 2. USE Smoke Screens 2. Disguise your actions. Deception is always the best strategy, but the best deceptions require a screen of smoke to distract people's attention from your real purpose. The bland exterior, like the unreadable poker face, is often the perfect smokescreen, hiding your intentions behind the comfortable and familiar. If you lead the sucker down a familiar path, he won't catch on when you lead him into a trap. Observance of the law. In 1910, a Mr. Sam Giesel of Chicago sold his warehouse business for close to $1 million. He settled down to semi-retirement and the managing of his many properties, but deep inside he itched for the old days of deal-making. One day a young man named Joseph Weil visited his office, wanting to buy an apartment he had up for sale. Giesel explained the terms. The price was $8,000, but he only required a down payment of $2,000. Weil said he would sleep on it, but he came back the following day and offered to pay the full $8,000 in cash if Giesel could wait a couple of days until a deal Weil was working on came through. Even in semi-retirement, a clever businessman like Giesel was curious as to how Weil would be able to come up with so much cash, roughly $150,000 today, so quickly. Weil seemed reluctant to say, and quickly changed the subject, but Giesel was persistent. Finally, after assurances of confidentiality, Weil told Giesel the following story. Weil's uncle was the secretary to a coterie of multimillionaire financiers. These wealthy gentlemen had purchased a hunting lodge in Michigan 10 years ago at a cheap price. They had not used the lodge for a few years, so they had decided to sell it, and had asked Weil's uncle to get whatever he could for it, for good reasons of his own. The uncle had been nursing a grudge against the millionaires for years. This was his chance to get back at them. He would sell the property for $35,000 to a set-up man whom it was Weil's job to find. The financiers were too wealthy to worry about this low price. The set-up man would then turn around and sell the property again for its real price, around $155,000. The uncle, Weil, and the third man would split the profits from this second sale. It was all legal and for a good cause, the uncle's just retribution. Giesel had heard enough. He wanted to be the set-up beer. Weil was reluctant to involve him, but Giesel would not back down. The idea of a large profit, plus a little adventure, had him champing at the bit. Weil explained that Giesel would have to put up the $35,000 in cash to bring the deal off. Giesel, a millionaire, said he could get the money with a snap of his fingers. Weil finally relented and agreed to arrange a meeting between the uncle, Giesel, and the financiers in the town of Galesburg, Illinois. On the train ride to Galesburg, Giesel met the uncle, an impressive man with whom he avidly discussed business, while also brought along a companion, a somewhat paunchy man named George Gross. Weil explained to Giesel that he himself was a boxing trainer, that Gross was one of the promising prize-fighters he trained, and that he had asked Gross to come along to make sure the fighter stayed in shape. For a promising fighter, Gross was unimpressive looking. He had grey hair and a beer belly butt. Giesel was so excited about the deal that he didn't really think about the man's flabby appearance. Once in Galesburg, Weil and his uncle went to fetch the financiers. While Giesel waited in a hotel room with Gross, who promptly put on his boxing trunks. As Giesel half-watched, Gross began to shadow box. Distracted as he was, Giesel ignored how badly the boxer wheezed after a few minutes of exercise. Although his style seemed real enough, an hour later, Weil and his uncle reappeared with the financiers, an impressive, intimidating group of men, all wearing fancy suits. The meeting went well, and the financiers agreed to sell the lodge to Giesel, who had already had the $35,000 wired to a local bank. This minor business now settled, the financiers sat back in their chairs and began to banter about high finance, throwing out the name J.P. Morgan as if they knew the man. Finally, one of them noticed the boxer in the corner of the room. Weil explained what he was doing there. The financier countered that he too had a boxer in his entourage, whom he named. Weil laughed brazenly and exclaimed that his man could easily knock out their Cayman. Conversation escalated into argument. In the heat of passion, Wall challenged the men to a bet. The financiers eagerly agreed and left to get their man ready for a fight the next day. As soon as they had left, the uncle yelled at Weil, right in front of Giesel. They did not have enough money to bet with, and once the financiers discovered this, the uncle would be fired. Weil apologized for getting him in this mess, but he had a plan. He knew the other boxer well, and with a little bribe, they could fix the fight. But where would the money come from for the bet? The uncle replied. Without it, they were as good as dead. Finally, Giesel had heard enough. Unwilling to jeopardize his deal with any ill will, he offered his own $35,000 cash for part of the bet. Even if he lost that, he would wire for more money and still make a profit on the sale of the lodge. The uncle and nephew thanked him. With their own $15,000 and Giesel's $35,000, they would manage to have enough for the bet. That evening, as Giesel watched the two boxers rehearse the fix in the hotel room, his mind reeled at the killing he was going to make from both the boxing match and the sale of the lodge. The fight took place in a gym the next day. Weil handled the cash, which was placed for security in a locked box. Everything was proceeding as planned in the hotel room. The financiers were looking glum at how badly their fighter was doing, and Giesel was dreaming about the easy money he was about to make. Then, suddenly, a wild swing by the financier's fighter hit Gross hard in the face, knocking him down. When he hit the canvas, blood spurted from his mouth. He coughed, then lay still. One of the financiers, a former doctor, checked his pulse. He was dead. The millionaires panicked. Everyone had to get out before the police arrived. They could all be charged with murder. Terrified, Giesel hightailed it out of the gym and back to Chicago, leaving behind his $35,000, which he was only too glad to forget, for it seemed a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime. He never wanted to see Weil or any of the others again. After Giesel scurried out, Gross stood up, under his own steam. The blood that had spurted from his mouth came from a bowl filled with chicken blood and hot water that he had hidden in his cheek. The whole affair had been masterminded by Weil, better known as the Yellow Kid, one of the most creative con artists in history. Weil split the $35,000 with the fee. Financiers and the boxers, all fellow con artists. A nice little profit for a few days' work. Interpretation. The Yellow Kid had staked out Giesel as the perfect sucker long before he set up the con. He knew the boxing match scam would be the perfect ruse to separate Giesel from his money quickly and definitively. But he also knew that if he had begun by trying to interest Giesel in the boxing match, he would have failed miserably. He had to conceal his intentions and switch attention. Create a smoke screen, in this case the sale of the lodge, on the train ride and in the hotel room. Giesel's mind had been calm, completely occupied with the pending deal, the easy money, the chance to hobnob with wealthy men. He had failed to notice that Gross was out of shape and middle-aged at best. Such is the distracting power of a smoke screen. Engrossed in the business deal, Giesel's attention was easily diverted to the boxing match, but only at a point when it was already too late for him to notice the details that would have given Gross away. The match, after all, now depended on a bribe rather than on the boxer's physical condition, and Giesel was so distracted at the end by the illusion of the boxer's death that he completely forgot about his money. Learn from the Yellow Kid. The familiar, inconspicuous front is the perfect smokescreen. Approach your mark with an idea that seems ordinary enough: a business deal, financial intrigue. The sucker's mind is distracted, his suspicions allayed. That is when you gently guide him onto the second path, the slippery slope down which he slides helplessly into your trap. Observance of the law too. In the mid-1920s, the powerful warlords of Ethiopia were coming to the realization that a young man of the nobility named Haile Selassie, also known as Rastafari, was outcompeting them all and nearing the point where he could proclaim himself their leader, unifying the country for the first time in decades. Most of his rivals could not understand how this wispy, quiet, mild-mannered man had been able to take control, yet in 1927, Selassie was able to summon the warlords, one at a time, to come to Addis Ababa to declare their loyalty and recognize him as leader. Some hurried, some hesitated, but only one, Djezmok Balka of Sidamo, dared defy Selassie totally. A blustery man, Balka was a great warrior, and he considered the new leader weak and unworthy. He pointedly stayed away from the capital. Finally Selassie, in his gentle but stern way, commanded Balka to come. The warlord decided to obey, but in doing so he would turn the tables on this pretender to the Ethiopian throne. He would come to Addis Ababa at his own speed, and with army of 10,000 men, a force large enough to defend himself, perhaps start a civil war, stationing this formidable force in a valley 3 miles from the capital. He waited, as a king would. Selassie would have to come to him. Selassie did indeed send emissaries, asking Balka to attend an afternoon banquet in his honor. But Balka, no fool, knew history. He knew that previous kings and lords of Ethiopia had used banquets as a trap. Once he was there and full of drink, Selassie would have him arrested or murdered. To signal his understanding of the situation, he agreed to come to the banquet, but only if he could bring his personal bodyguard, 600 of his best soldiers, all armed and ready to defend him and themselves. To Balka's surprise, Selassie answered with the utmost politeness that he would be honored to play host to such warriors. On the way to the banquet, Balka warned his soldiers not to get drunk and to be on their guard. When they arrived at the palace, Selassie was his charming best. He deferred to Balka, treated him if he desperately needed his approval and cooperation. But Balka refused to be charmed, and he warned Selassie that if he did not return to his camp by nightfall, his army had orders to attack the capital. Selassie reacted as if hurt by his mistrust. Over the meal, when it came time for the traditional singing of songs in honor of Ethiopia's leaders, he made a point of allowing only songs honoring the warlord of Sidamo. It seemed to Balka that Selassie was scared, intimidated by this great warrior who could not be outwitted. Sensing the change, Balka believed that he would be the one to call the shots in the days to come. At the end of the afternoon, Balka and his soldiers began their march back to camp amidst cheers and gun salutes. Looking back to the capital over his shoulder, he planned his strategy how his own soldiers would march through the capital in triumph within weeks, and Selassie would be put in his place being either prison or death. When Balka came in sight of his camp, however, he saw that something was terribly wrong. Where before there had been colorful tents, stretching as far as the eye could see, now there was nothing, only smoke from doused fires. What devil's magic was this? A witness told Balka what had happened. During the banquet, a large army, commanded by an ally of Selassie's, had stolen up on Balka's encampment by a side route he had not seen, hurried back with his 600-man bodyguard. Selassie had armed his own troops with baskets of gold and cash. They had surrounded Balka's army and proceeded to perk every last one of their weapons. Those who refused were easily intimidated. Within a few hours, Balka's entire force had been disarmed and scattered in all directions. Realizing his danger, Balka decided to march south with his 600 soldiers to regroup, but the same army that had disarmed his soldiers blocked his way. The other way out was to march on the capital, but Selassie had set a large army to defend it. Like a chess player, he had predicted Balka's moves and had checkmated him. For the first time in his life, Balka surrendered to repent his sins of pride and ambition. He agreed to enter a monastery. Interpretation. Throughout Selassie's long reign, no one could quite figure him out. Ethiopians liked their leaders fierce, but Selassie, who wore the front of a gentle, peace-loving man, lasted longer than any of them. Never angry or impatient, he lured his victims with sweet smiles, lulling them with charm and obsequiousness before he attacked. In the case of Balka, Selassie played on the man's wariness, his suspicion that the banquet was a trap, which in fact it was, but not the one he expected. Selassie's way of allaying Balka's fears, letting him bring his bodyguard to the banquet, giving him top billing there, making him feign control, created a thick smoke screen, concealing the real action 3 miles away. Remember, the paranoid and wary are often the easiest to deceive. win their trust in one area, and you have a smoke screen that blinds their view in another, letting you creep up and level them with a devastating blow, a helpful or apparently honest gesture, or one that implies the other person's superiority. These are perfect diversionary devices, properly set up. The smoke screen is a weapon of great power. It enabled the gentle Selassie to totally destroy his enemy without firing a single bullet. Do not underestimate the power of Tafari. He creeps like a mouse, but he has jaws like a lion. Balka of Sidamo's last words before entering the monastery. Keys to power. If you believe that deceivers are colorful folk who mislead with elaborate lies and tall tales, you are greatly mistaken. The best deceivers utilize a bland and inconspicuous front that calls no attention to themselves. They know that extravagant words and gestures immediately raise suspicion. Instead, they envelop their mark in the familiar, the banal, the harmless. In Yellow Kid Wall's dealings with Sanjizel, the familiar was a business deal. In the Ethiopian case, it was Selassie's misleading obsequiousness, exactly what Balka would have expected from a weaker warlord. Once you have lulled your sucker's attention with the familiar, they will not notice the deception being perpetrated behind their backs. This is really too difficult for them to imagine that the bland and harmless derives from a simple truth. People can only focus on one thing at a time. Its son they are dealing with is simultaneously setting up something else. The more uniform the smoke in your smoke screen, the better it conceals your intentions. In the decoy and red herring devices discussed in your Vic Part 1, you actively distract people. In the smoke screen, you Tims, drawing them into your web, because it is so hypnotic. This is often the best way of concealing your intentions. The simplest form of smoke screen is facial expression. Behind a bland, unreadable exterior, all sorts of mayhem can be planned, without detection. This is a weapon that the most powerful men in history have learned to perfect. It was said that no one could read Franklin D. Roosevelt's face. Baron James Rothschild made a lifelong practice of disguising his real thoughts behind bland smiles and nondescript looks. Stendhal wrote of Talleyrand, "Never was a face less of a barometer." Henry Kissinger would bore his opponents around the negotiating table to tears. With his monotonous voice, his blank look, his endless recitations of details. Then, as their eyes glazed over, he would suddenly hit them with a list of bold terms. Caught off guard, they would be easily intimidated. As one poker manual explains it, while playing his hand, the good player is seldom an actor. Instead, he practices a bland behavior that minimizes readable patterns, frustrates and confuses opponents, permits greater concentration. An adaptable concept, the smoke screen can be practiced on a number of levels, all playing on the psychological principles of distraction and misdirection. One of the most effective smoke screens is the noble gesture. People want to believe apparently noble gestures are genuine, for the belief is pleasant. They rarely notice how deceptive these gestures can be. The art dealer Joseph Duveen was once confronted with a terrible problem. The millionaires who had paid so dearly for Duveen's paintings were running out of wall space, and with inheritance taxes getting ever higher, it seemed unlikely that they would keep buying. The solution was the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which Duveen helped create in 1937 by getting Andrew Mellon to donate his collection to it. The National Gallery was the perfect front for Duveen. In one gesture, his clients avoided taxes, cleared wall space for new purchases, and reduced the number of paintings on the market, maintaining the upward pressure on their prices. All this while, the donors created the appearance of being public benefactors. Another effective smoke screen is the pattern, the establishment of a series of actions that seduce the victim into believing who will continue in the same way. The pattern plays on the psychology of anticipation. Our behavior conforms to patterns, or so we like to think. In 1878, the American robber baron Jay Gould created began to threaten the monopoly of the telegraph company, Western Union. The directors of Western Union decided to buy Gould's company up. They had to spend a hefty sum, but they figured they had managed to rid themselves of an irritating competitor. A few months later, though, Gould was at it again, complaining he had been treated unfairly. He started up a second company to compete with Western Union and its new acquisition. The same thing happened again. Western Union bought him out to shut him up. Soon the pattern began for the third time, but now Gould went for the jugular. He suddenly staged a bloody takeover struggle and managed to gain complete control of Western Union. He had established a pattern that had tricked the company's directors into thinking his goal was to be bought out at a handsome rate. Once they paid him off, they relaxed and failed to notice that he was actually playing for a higher stakes. The pattern is powerful in that it deceives the other person into expecting the opposite of what you are really doing. Another psychological weakness on which to construct a smokescreen is the tendency to mistake appearances for reality, the feeling that if someone seems to belong to your group, their belonging must be real. This habit makes the seamless blend a very effective front. The trick is simple. You apply blending with those around you. The better you blend, the less suspicious you become. During the Cold War of the 1950s and 60s, as is now notorious, a slew of British civil servants passed secrets to the Soviets. They went undetected 4 years because they were apparently decent chaps, had gone to all the right schools, and fit the old boy network perfectly. Blending in is the perfect smoke screen for spying. The better you do it, the better you can conceal your intentions. Remember, it takes patience and humility to dull your brilliant colors, to put on the mask of the inconspicuous. Do not despair at having to wear such a bland mask. It is often your unreadability that draws people to you and makes you appear a person of power. Reversal. No smoke screen, red herring, false sincerity, or any other diversionary device will succeed in concealing your intentions. If you already have an established reputation for deception, and as you get older and achieve success, it often becomes increasingly difficult to disguise your cunning. Everyone knows you practice deception. Persist in playing naive, and you run the risk of seeming the rankiest hypocrite, which will severely limit your room to maneuver. In such cases, it is better to own up, to appear the honest rogue, or, better, the repentant rogue. Not only will you be admired for your frankness, but, most wonderful and strange of all, you will be able to continue your stratagems. As P.T. Barnum, the 19th century king of humbuggery, grew older, he learned to embrace his reputation as a grand deceiver. At one point he organized a buffalo hunt in New Jersey, complete with Indians and a few imported buffalo. He publicized the hunt as genuine, but it came off as so completely fake that the crowd, instead of getting angry and asking for their money back, was greatly amused. They knew Barnum pulled tricks all the time. That was the secret of his success, and they loved him for it. Learning a lesson from this affair, Barnum stopped concealing all of his devices, even revealing his deceptions in a tell-all autobiography. As Kierkegaard wrote, "The world wants to be deceived." Finally, although it is wiser to divert attention from your purposes by presenting a bland, familiar exterior, there are times when the colorful, conspicuous gesture is the right diversionary tactic. The great charlatan mountebanks of 17th and 18th century Europe used humor and entertainment to deceive their audiences. Dazzled by a great show, the public would not notice the charlatan's real intentions. Thus the star charlatan himself would appear in town in a night black coach drawn by black horses. Clowns, tightrope walkers, and star entertainers would accompany him, pulling people into his demonstrations of elixirs and quack potions. The charlatan made entertainment seem like the business of the day. The business of the day was actually the sale of the elixirs and quack potions. Spectacle and entertainment, clearly, are excellent devices to conceal your intentions, but they cannot be used indefinitely. The public grows tired and suspicious, and eventually catches on to the trick. And indeed, the charlatans had to move quickly from town to town before word spread that the potions were useless and the entertainment a trick. Powerful play with bland exteriors. On the other hand, the Talleyrans, the Rothschilds, the Salassies can practice their deceptions in the same place throughout their lifetimes. Their act never wears thin and rarely causes suspicion. The colorful smoke screen should be used cautiously, then and only when the occasion is right.